and they are actually talking about how yesterday's tariff announcement will affect the state of North Carolina and questions to the treasurer. We're going to listen into that now here on Live Impact News on WCNC+.
The other industry in healthcare. And so I'm just going to give you some open, can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are about what we do, in addition to giving maybe an infusion of money, but how do we think about modernizing that plan?
Sure. Thank you. In the end, we have to have sufficient data and sufficient quality and price data to allow our members to make better decisions for themselves, to keep themselves healthier in the longer run. That's the ultimate goal. It's the old Ben Franklin quote, an ounce of prevention, pound of cure. And that is maybe even an ounce and 10 pounds today, given the costs of hospitalization and procedures that people undergo. So we seek to do that in a value-based framework. We have a pilot ongoing with Wilmington Health in value-based care at the moment, and kudos to Treasurer Falwell for putting that in place, because it's innovation that I think could be important for us. We're about 1.5 years into that, so we're still learning what there is to know. We anticipate other pilots like that directionally align incentives and inform consumers and make providers compete. That's the recipe for productivity growth, which is lower prices over time. So we seek to try a number of things. Population health is one of them. So we're out there talking to providers who will help our members navigate the labyrinth of setting up healthcare appointments, making sure that they are current on their prescriptions. Again, ounce of prevention. So that's the orientation that we've got to go towards. Aetna has been a great partner in the transition, and one of the most important things they do for us is data, which will allow us to inform those consumers. It allows also the second effect of creating competitions for our volume. We hope to announce something around that in the second quarter here that will get us towards a longer-term sustainable program in certain procedures. How broadly we can go is defined a little bit by geography of the state. We have a number of counties where there is one provider, so those will be very different conversations than in the urban areas where there are multiple providers and we can set up a competitive process. So we need to cover all 100 counties, we need to cover all 760,000 members, and you cannot do that one size fits all, as you know better than most.
Thank you very much. And I think that move to value-based is really important. And the fact that we're just now doing pilots when the industry, we're a decade into this. And so do you have an idea about how we move from just pilots to really this becomes a core of the plan?
We need to have a more defined rural strategy before we can have a comprehensive answer to the question. I think we can move beyond pilots in a year or so as we get the data from Wilmington and find other partners in other areas. We need to have a rural strategy that is adjacent to that will probably be dependent on telehealth. Just simply the reality of where providers are and where they want to practice. So we do not have an answer fully to the 100 county problem. I think the 15 counties are probably going to be ahead of the other 85.
One of the things that I learned was because, I had my card and it said Blue Cross Blue Shield, and what I learned when I got up here is that all they do is process the claims. And the plan is really designed in the treasurer's office, which I think is probably unusual for states. Okay. And the same thing with Aetna, and they just process claims. But I wonder, just like you have an investment group that you're talking about, do you think that you have a group to help design the plan and the proper input from providers and others to help you design that? Or is that some statutory authority you need to help create a similar group like you have on the investment side to help with the state health plan?
We have authority and staffing within the state health plan group that I think is sufficient to do the things we need to do. What I do not know is what our relationships and partnerships will be like with the providers, the large providers particularly. As you may know, the Treasurer's Office and the providers has not had historically a fantastic relationship. And we seek to mend those. We seek to recognize that they are our partners in keeping North Carolinians healthy. But whether we can do that on a set of terms that makes sense for the solvency of the state health plan, I do not know. And so to the extent we can't, we're going to have to figure out how we self-source. There are some statutory limitations around that we may want to explore down the line. But for now, I'm hopeful that we can partner with the existing providers to get to better outcomes.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move on to Representative Cervania.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Treasurer, for being here. We were looking forward to you coming. And I will not argue with your wife in saying you probably are the best in this space. And this is not my wheelhouse. But I'm going to just make these very basic questions. When I was in my 20s, I was told by my financial advisors that, oh, you can have, my risk parameters and my liquidity were more fluid, that I could take more risks. Now that I'm older, and I won't date myself, that's not the case. Right. And if I equate this to our pension plan, this is money that's really on the latter stages of a person's life, right? Now we have HB 92, which we passed, still with many of my colleagues, many of our state employees and retirees still having so many questions about the investment and commitment towards crypto. We recognize that it's an option for you to invest in, and you've expressed that it may not be something that you do now. It's recognized also that the investment would be an ETF and not direct, so that lessens the volatility, right, which is good, but there's still immense volatility. And also it isolates it to really the only crypto to be invested in is Bitcoin. Right. So I want to ask the questions of many of what we have and constituents are having, that you have the option to put 10% in. Now, if you're my advisor in my near retirement age, would you actually recommend anyone to put so much in their diversified portfolio and that much risk in a volatile asset or investment?
The simple answer to your question is no. But maybe a couple of clarifying comments. There's a misperception of the pension system as kind of being the age of its beneficiaries, so to speak, from a risk tolerance perspective. The state pension payments are an obligation of the pension trust, but they are also an obligation of the state itself. So the assets exist separately from the liabilities. The liabilities that we have are to folks who are later in age and have a lower risk tolerance, but they are perpetual for the state. So I would think about pension plans as much younger than their beneficiaries from a risk tolerance perspective. This pension plan, if we closed it today, and no one is asking to do that, let's be very clear, would exist for another 100 years, probably longer. So these are extremely long-lived sets of investment programs and need to be conscious of taking appropriate risk as a result, different than their beneficiaries. So I think that's an important point to make. Where we are in Bitcoin or crypto today is not necessarily where we will always be. And I think that it is one piece of the broader puzzle of how we should govern investments. We should have, again, an aggregate risk tolerance, and we should delegate to the professionals how to tactically answer the strategic question of how much risk we should take. And we should reserve the strategic answer for you all and for the investment board. So no, 10% in any asset other than U.S. Treasuries, we will not have.
Right. Thank you. Follow up.
Still about a minute and a half.
So, in crypto investment, it said that it's not material, it's not backed by anything. And if we invest it, how does it return back? It's not a currency. It's not, help us understand that. If we invest it, how does it come back to us? Does it come back as money? Is it Bitcoin still? Right. And then how can we pay out to our retirees in Bitcoin that they can use to buy services and goods? How would that look like?
Sure. I think the best analogy is gold. What is gold worth? It's the eye of the beholder over and over again. It is a scarce resource. that is very hard to make much more of. And gold benefits from multiple millennia of that being a tradition, but it's no less true. Like, what is gold worth? People will point to industrial use, but there's barely any of that. It's essentially, it's worth what we think it's worth. The U.S. dollar is made of cotton. What is the U.S. dollar actually worth? Well, it's worth the promise that is implied behind it. And so Bitcoin exists in the realm of those assets. It is hard to get your head around what is it actually worth, but as long as people collectively think it's worth something, then it is worth something. And that may be unsatisfying for you, but that's how money exists. That's why money exists.
I invest in gold.
Sure.
And if I was going to get a payback, I could actually receive that gold bar of like $400,000.
Sure.
But I can't get anything back from Bitcoin that's tangible. You quote gold and cotton. I can get a bale of cotton for the amount I'm investing. So I want to be open-minded to this. But in your examples, those are tangible things that I can get back and put in my safe deposit box in the theory. But I can't do that with Bitcoin.
Okay. I would ask you, when you open your banking app, why do you feel good that there's money in that? It's because it's a ledger entry that is yours. Bitcoin is no different. It is a ledger entry that is yours. And you could argue the value of that. It's not tangible, it's ethereal. But in the end, that's the promise that's behind that of money. That we all collectively believe, and that's why it's worth things. It's not an overly satisfying answer, but it is the answer.
Thank you, Representative Servania. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Representative Arp, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Warren. Thank you for being with us, Treasurer Briner. Today I got 4 questions. One, I wanted to come back to a statement made by Representative Ager about us have underfunded our pension plans, which I don't think is an accurate statement, and I don't know that he intended to mean it that way. But the reality is we've funded through the General Assembly, and I believe even in your first comments, that we have in fact funded the actuarially required pension every time, save 1 year, I believe, that was in several years past, under another administration, in fact. And that the deficit that you spoke of is because of unrealized return investments on the invested portfolio. We've been under returning the portfolio, compounding of the interest. Is that correct? And would you like to clarify that statement?
Sure. No, that is exactly correct. So we have a $16 billion deficit. And if you look at the 1.5% or so shortfall of our returns to our goal, compounded over the last 10 years, that is all of that deficit and then some. We would be 101 or 102% funded if the investment side had lived up to its end of the bargain. Yes, 83 of the last 84 years, I believe, is fully funding of the required contribution from the General Assembly, and the one I think was 75%. I think that was in 2001. So that is a record that is unmatched across the United States. That is something we should all be proud of as North Carolinians. The challenge in the pension plan is very clearly the investment side.
Thank you, Treasurer Brown. Another question. The return on the general fund cash, can you explain that a little bit? We have a healthy cash statement, cash position. That's different than the pension investment, correct? And can you unpack that for us and explain to our committee?
Sure. So we manage $127 billion in the pension system. We manage about $45 billion of cash on top of that. That is cash from the state, but also from all the municipalities throughout the state that's on deposit with our financial operations division. We buy extremely safe, extremely short-term treasuries largely in that program. You'll see a monthly report that we deliver at the Council of State that talks about the earnings for the Highway Trust Fund, but also for the general fund on that. It's yielding...
And we count on those earnings, by the way.
And they've been very big. I think it's $500 million in the last year. That's yielding about 4.9% right now, at least as of February. It'll move around lower as of today. But those are extremely safe AAA securities, extremely liquid, as it should be for people who depend on being able to draw on them daily.
Third question. Thank you very much. We mentioned, and you spoke of changing, I believe your quote was changing the sole fiduciary. There certainly needs to be doing that, but our current general law states that, and stated the treasurer may delegate his or her powers and duties under the section of the executive administrator, the board of trustees, employees of the plan. In delegating powers or duties, however, the state treasurer maintains a responsibility for the performance of those powers and duties. So what I'm trying to unpack a little bit is this distributed investment advisory versus you retaining still that sole fiduciary to make those decisions. Quite frankly, I think I'm with you absolutely in widening up this investment strategy. You said that we have to have a 6.5% return on that. Fully in agreement. Those numbers are reasonable, and it's just math, and we got to do that. Can you unpack for me how you still maintain sole fiduciary with a distributed investment advisory group, or that we don't go so far that no one is accountable in those investment decisions, if that makes sense?
Sure. So the current delegations are to the chief investment officer and to the investment team around investment sourcing. Ultimately, I still sign every single investment. I still approve every single investment. So I have daily meetings around that. As the sole fiduciary, it has to be that way, and it should be that way. The idea behind the board is to vest those fiduciary authorities into the board. So the state treasurer is a member of that board. You'll be part of the fiduciary board, but there will be 4 other members as well. So the buck will stop with the board, of which the treasurer is 1 member.
Okay. The fourth question I have regards around our debt and affordability, and I thank your office for continuing to put out the debt affordability advisory. I look very deeply at that and use that. I do think it's worth pointing out that in 2012, our outstanding tax-supported general fund debt was $6.4 billion. It is projected in 2025 to be at $2.135 billion. That's 67% reduction in our state debt, yes. Which is incredibly significant, and I want to make that statement very loud and clear. And in fact, and that's over 13 years. And in fact, in 2028, which is the DACA report, suggests that the debt would drop to 1.3 billion, down from 6.5 billion. That's an 80% reduction in 16 years. That money is available for us to now not pay banks and investment companies, but be able to be used in our state. I say all that because there are 2 debt structures. One is the general fund supported debt, and the other is the transportation debt. Our transportation debt is not similarly situated. My question to you is, what is your most significant concerns about the transportation side? I know we as a state still retain a AAA bond rating and all of that. What would you say is your most significant concerns about the transportation debt and how we're funding transportation, and what are the challenges that we need to be aware of as we enact budgets?
Sure. So with respect to transportation debt, there's the federal program, and we're issuing both of these as we speak. So the federal Garvey program, and then there's the state Build-NC program, which is essentially a state Garvey program. And these are limited obligation bonds that essentially pull forward gas tax revenues and allow us to build roads in advance of when we could otherwise. There's a state growth question embedded in all of this that is way beyond my remit, so I'm going to not touch that one. I think the big funding issue for transportation is the electrification of the vehicle fleet. As I said, you're pulling gas taxes forward. As we move towards a more and more electric fleet, you have less and less gas taxes as a percentage of the cars on the road. And how do we appropriately build roads across the auto fleet, gas or otherwise? That is the, I think, looming question across many of these federal and state Garvey programs that, is a very long-run question, but is one that I think we need to get ahead of for transportation funding.
I share your concerns about that. In fact, that's the reason for my question, is that we are pulling forward gas tax receipts that are diminishing to cover debt that is projected out, and that imbalance is very concerning to me, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. Thank you.
Representative Arp, thank you for your question. Representative Hawkins, and then we're going to go on to Representative Willingham, Escoveria, and Amber Baker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer, for being here today. I want to add on to Representative Dean Arp's question around transportation and really around our bonding capacity as a state. And so if you could just share with share with us what you think North Carolina's bonding capacity is. I know that in the governor's budget, he put forth a $4 billion infrastructure bond, and to Representative Arp's point, with where we are and the way that we're funding transportation, we are growing significantly and need to make infrastructural investments. Do you have thoughts about what a transportation bond and an infrastructure bond look like for North Carolina, and the time frame that we could do something based on our bonding capacity?
I tend to think about these matters as the aggregate balance sheet of North Carolina. How much debt and quasi-debt, that last piece is important, do we maintain, and what's appropriate? Representative Arp talked about the debt that we have outstanding, general obligation, there's limited obligation as well, Garvey, et cetera. These are very small relative to the non-classic debt, but actual liabilities that we maintain in the state health plan, particularly, that's about $36 billion. And in the state pension plan, that's about $16 billion. So when I look at the aggregate balance sheet of the state of North Carolina, I see $52 billion that we owe that is not classified as debt. And so when I think about issuing new debt, that's front of mind. I think we need to address those big liabilities before we consider new ones, because in aggregate, I think we have enough debt on our balance sheet.
Okay. Thank you. And Representative Arp, I noticed that he came in 2013, and it's been 13 years later, so he's taking full credit for the reduction of debt in the state of North Carolina.
Yes, I
am. My next question starts with a statement, and I noticed that you came to one of the finest institutions in the state of North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina Central University, to announce the pilot, the artificial intelligence pilot, to make government more efficient and responsive. Could you talk a little about that to this group and what you think will happen over the next 5 years?
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you for that. I was afraid you'd say Duke University. And
that would be a negative.
Agree with that.
Yeah, that would be a negative.
No, we were pleased to do it at North Carolina Central. They're doing amazing things in AI, and so wanted to recognize that. Our partners at OpenAI have been very generous and helpful in thinking through how we bring AI responsibly to state government. We have two divisions that benefit from a natural competitive advantage in this regard, and that they really only touch public data. The bright red line that we've maintained and that is going to be difficult to navigate over time is how do we make sure that where we use AI doesn't expose private data in any way? Well, we answered that question by implementing it in places that don't have private data in the first place. So over time, to maximize the value of AI, you need to answer that question, but we're deliberately not answering that question today. So we're taking OpenAI and their product ChatGPT into unclaimed property, where our data challenge is primarily a public data challenge. Can we find people? and into state and local government, where our data challenge is primarily, are we processing publicly available audited financials correctly and insightfully? So we're hopeful to do both those things better by virtue of our partnership with OpenAI. It is a 12-week pilot program. The price is perfect in that it's zero, and they're looking to prove their technology's use in state government. So we're excited to embark on that, and our team has gotten to work already.